Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 33.
33?
33 episodes.
Wow.
Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. This week, Gareth Edwards The Creator. A Cineboys first, actually, in terms of a discussion about the sci-fi genre.
I
think we've sort of skirted around it and talked about it in sort of various episodes gone by.
Yeah.
But this is the first time we're going to properly sort of wade into it.
Yes, exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Chiefly focusing on sort of sci-fi films that around the subject of robotics and AI, as that is sort of the central narrative thread of The Creator. So we'll have a good natter about all that stuff. Discussion around the career of Gareth Edwards, because I think it's quite interesting.
It is, yeah,
trajectory.
yeah. And the way he makes films is fascinating as well.
Yes.
Or at least his early work. I mean, sans maybe Godzilla and Rogue One, but like the way he does things is really grassroots, I'd say.
Yeah, which is sort of bizarre through the lens of modern blockbuster filmmaking. It's quite refreshing.
Yeah, completely.
And then, of course, we'll review the film itself.
Yes.
In classic Cineboy style. Let's do that now.
Let's do it now. Let's not deviate.
No.
Questing the cinematic void.
Right then. Also, actually, before we kick off the discussion, this is the first episode recorded from the new...
the new room.
The new Cineboys room. My living room. But, we're hoping in the future to maybe start filming ourselves.
That should be interesting.
As we podcast.
Yeah. Not just day to day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's really distracting, but in a good way, I think, considering the subject matter of the podcast, in that there's about 400 DVDs and Blu-rays, like, within about a metre of my eyes. So I can kind of... I suppose it would be quite good if we're, like, thinking of examples of movies and you can kind of just, like, have a quick look.
Yeah. 400, double that. Add a few extra on top.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry.
I wasted my life.
We'll re-record it. 800. I'll cut that in later.
This only works as a boast in a film podcast. In any other way, but like, I'd feel quite embarrassed and sort of naked. But no, we're very excited by the prospect of filming ourselves podcasting. But that probably will be a little bit later down the line. But I just thought it was worth mentioning to sort of whet your appetites.
Yes,
put a face to the voice, which might end up doing our podcast a disservice. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll have to like get haircuts and wear suits and stuff and
trim our body hair.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So then, the sci-fi genre, more specifically, sci-fi films, as alluded to in the intro, that focus on AI, robotics.
Yep.
One thing that really struck me about The Creator was, I don't know, there was something more impactful about the ideas that Gareth Edwards was unpacking on the basis of the sort of ubiquitous nature of the debate around AI. It feels like it's going to be something that's going to dig itself deeper in our society, in our way of life, and have a considerable impact on the human experience, both individually and collectively.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, I think even though the film is already sort of retreading very well trodden ground, the sort of timing of its release, I don't know, it only really helped the film in that way, I think.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of mixed fix. Some people think it really squandered the opportunities in releasing it at a time when obviously you got the SAG-AFTRA strike, and a lot of that was concerning the use of AI in the sense that it's displacing people's jobs.
Yeah.
Some people thought that it was kind of in poor taste releasing a film like this, but other people I've noticed have sort of really praised its ability to kind of bring those issues forward in obviously a ridiculously heightened manner.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I mean, the idea of AI becoming something that would envelop humanity has been around in sci-fi for a really long time, but it's only now that we're sort of on the cusp of it, or at least a lot of people think that we are. That those sort of narratives either get brought back or new narratives are created. So yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, we'll go into this in the review part of the discussion regarding the film, but yeah, it's very well trodden ground, and it doesn't always pull it off. But I don't know, like, I just feel that the fact that this is something that is obviously already impacting people's lives, as you mentioned, the SAG-AFTRA strikes, the concerns on the impact of AI on workforces, human creativity.
Yeah,
these are debates that are sort of very very heated.
Yeah.
And are set to probably dog the discourse for a very, very long time.
Oh man, yeah.
I don't know if dog's necessarily the right word, but they're definitely going to be around. So yeah, I just feel like the release felt quite timely, and I can understand the negative reaction and responses to that on that basis.
Yeah.
But for me, I don't know, even if the film didn't necessarily do anything with particular grace, thematically speaking, it just, I don't know, it felt a little bit more impactful. Maybe I was just in the right mood for it at the time.
No, I think you're right. There's definitely something in that, in the way it kind of handles those themes. I sort of think it's only becoming the problem with the whole AI thing. Very briefly,
yeah, no, go
before
for it.
we talk about loads of movies, is that you could argue that factories employed this technique like 30, 40 years ago. It's like sort of over mechanization of industrial process, basically, which displaced loads of people's jobs back then. But obviously, in the case of people working in factories, it's largely like a working class environment. And I do think it's kind of interesting that now the same thing is happening to loads of writers.
yeah.
I was like, well, this is unacceptable all of a sudden.
yeah.
I don't know. I'm in two minds about it, because obviously it is horrible and probably very unexpected. It's never nice when people like lose their houses and income and stuff. But there's definitely sort of a bit of a cognitive dissonance going on in my mind.
I think that's kind of, yeah, I think it's quite fair enough. I mean, I think there's also, I think the argument that's often leveraged against these writer strikes is this idea that if you're a writer, you're being paid an absurd amount of money, which isn't true.
No, that is not true. Yeah,
there are a lot of writers who are sort of on welfare. Writers who contributed to some of the most like popular shows on like iTunes and Netflix, or Apple, sorry. Netflix, Amazon, So I don't know, I see your point, and I think you're absolutely right to mention it in that context. The use of, robotics in the sort of manufacturing sector has really taken off and has displaced a lot of people. So I think you're right that it's interesting that these discussions are really becoming more intense now. On the basis of people in the industry being worried about their livelihoods and their jobs. And it's
just odd that it's creatives. Again, I'm definitely not saying that every creative in the world is like a middle class person. It's completely not true.
Statistically, it's probably more likely.
Well, yeah,
certainly in England.
I think there's definitely a kind of maybe a prejudice against. You hear Hollywood, you just think money, don't you? Like, it's just an automatic thing, and obviously it's a lot more complicated than that.
No, it's worth bringing up though. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Let's move on to some films then. Let's just talk broadly, and we're going to sort of just dance through many films, many of which I'm sure even viewers that wouldn't necessarily call themselves cinephiles,
the casual viewers,
the casual viewer would have definitely seen. Because it's it's an aspect of the genre that has proved incredibly popular. Why is it, do you think, most of the sort of most popular examples, I'm thinking Terminator, The Matrix, why is it always or wholly negative?
It's funny, I think part of the problem, and it's not a problem, but part of the reason why that is because it's easier to write a villainous role with something that by its very nature has no personality.
Right, okay.
Or at least its personality
or soul.
Exactly. It's constructed to kill, right? And obviously they actually kind of play with that in Terminator 2 a little bit, and that he becomes more of like a kind of empathetic robot, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, The Matrix is the most kind of clear-cut example of the idea of robotics, and I think you could call it AI in The Matrix. I suppose it is. Yeah. And obviously there's a lot more to The Matrix in that it plays with like philosophical ideas, but it was nonetheless robots that started a war with humans, wasn't that right? So and it's easier to write an adversary if it's not dogged by complexity, the complexity of being human, I suppose.
I'd not considered that.
I'm thinking also someone like Ash from Alien.
Right. Okay.
And his,
of course,
his role that he plays, he was always represented as being like a stickler for the rules, right? In the early days, he's kind of like sort of the most loyal out of all of them to the company. Before it was renamed Weyland-Yutani for some reason. And then he turns out to literally be a robot, right, representing the company and representing the ideals and obviously he sort of secretly knows the real reason behind the mission and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just it's a good way to poke at corporations as well as like kind of faceless entities maybe, and that's what I think Ash represents that really well.
Yeah. I'd not considered him as an example, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
in that sort of way in which he embodies the corporate values and sort of the weaponization of the xenomorph.
Yes,
is like, at the expense of the lives of the crew, is like a very sort of clear cut and overt sort of critique of the way corporations view their workforce or something like that. Yeah, very good. No, I like it. I also think there's a way in which to sort of critique the element of human nature as well, which is something the creator does, is that it's not necessarily just saying robots are evil. Or AI is just naturally going to be evil, or to the or the creation of it is going to be to the detriment of humankind. It's how humans create it and what humans use it for that's the problem. And I think if you think about in the context of certainly the Matrix and actually Terminator, they are using robotics not only to benefit humanity but also to kill each other. And it's that sort of. And certainly in the case of Terminator, this sentient AI just starts to sort of view the human race as a problem, like a parasite, or Agent Smith in the Matrix, talks about this idea that humans are almost separate have managed to make themselves separate from the natural world they inhabit, in the sense that every other animal is sort of not happy but slots into place in the ecosystem, whereas humans aren't happy with that.
Yeah, there's that speech. I watched The Matrix really recently, actually. That speech of him saying like that he's describing humanity like a cancer that keeps spreading to different areas, whereas everyone else is in like harmony. He's like strangely, he's kind of I guess he's sort of almost like a climate activist. Agent Smith. It's such a strange way to think of him, but
yes, it is.
That is the values that he holds, and that's his motivation for what he's doing, and that's the only explanation you ever get. I didn't actually think about it that way. But,
and it's the idea is that that it's how the humans choose to use this technology. Because I think you have lots of discussions with people that are really excited and enthusiastic about this kind of technology. They always say, well, it's going to make humanity better. It's going to stop us from doing all the fucking bullshit, pointless jobs we don't need to do, so we can focus on like art and creativity and community. And that all sounds bloody lovely. But the fact of the reality is, if you chart every major technological advancement that has been to the betterment of the system that we live in, it is usually really only benefited a certain group of people. So. And are those people going to want to relinquish their power to allow? This is starting to sound a bit conspiratorial, but you know what I mean. It's like, are those people going to really relinquish their power in the pursuit of this utopian ideal that is sort of cultivated by technology that busies itself in the background as we skip around with the badgers and make films and stuff? Do you know what I mean? It's
talk about ideas and it's a very utopian way of looking at it, and
these films are basically saying that's that's all well and good, but the likelihood is that humanity is going to use this stuff for something that's ultimately going to be to our detriment. For warfare, for to continue to mine the planet's natural resources to the point of no return. All this sort of stuff. And even if the robots end up being the sort of villain in the very literal sense that you said at the start of the discussion, in both examples, they are a villain as a result of human action and behaviour beforehand. Exactly,
they're always representing a bad sort of side of humanity. It's never them themselves, because ultimately they've been programmed that way, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm trying to think of other sort of famous robots. I don't know why none are springing to mind at the moment.
Blade Runner,
the replicants. Are they robots? Do they count? I mean, they do count in the sense that they are created by humanity. So I suppose yes, they do.
But then they are sort of evolved to take on their own sort of sentience and their own humanity. And that makes them a problem.
Yes, and then I love the ending to Blade Runner, and I kind of love that Ridley Scott gave us a definitive answer as to Deckard's own identity, in that he is a replicant. There's an interview with Ridley Scott where he just goes, he's a replicant. He sort of admits it, and
spoilers.
And that just adds a whole, right at the end, such a great, not twist, because it's one you'd have to, and it's, well, for a start, it's one that the studio kind of dumbed down in theatrical release, and it got restored with, there's a cutaway to a silver unicorn, isn't there, like made out of tin foil, and that kind of prompts you into thinking, like, oh shit, he's a replicant, right? Yeah, the way Blade Runner is structured is interesting, because the idea, and it's similar to The Creator actually, is that these replicants are among us already and have been for a really long time, as opposed to something like iRobot, where robots have been around for ages, but these new ones are kind of, it's on the cusp of change, whereas you feel like the change has already happened in Blade Runner. Which then gives way to the kind of really unique atmosphere that film has. And often, like, operatic, quite confusing dialogue as well, like the whole Tannhauser Gate thing at the end. We were like, Rutger Hauer. Oh, that's great, but totally lost my train of thought. By the way, I'm just banging on about Blade Runner.
No, it's welcome, and it makes sense in the context of this discussion. So bang away, big boy. No, I mean it's arguably not quite as cynical as the first two examples mentioned.
True.
I mean there is like a definite sense of this sort of corporate powerhouses in the background and their machinations, obviously having a clear impact on the sort of philosophies of a lot of the characters in the film, or indeed the world behind them. It's all very smoky and dirty. So I think there's definitely a sort of very strong dystopian thread in Blade Runner. Yeah, but it's not as explicit in terms of the Matrix or Terminator. I mean, you think the Matrix, obviously the characters are dealing with the defeat of humanity.
Yes, yeah.
And in a way, so is Terminator. There's a sort of there's a sort of determinism to Terminator, which they explore in many sequels.
And they keep redoing it.
Yeah,
they keep like, not those. Yeah, Terminator 1, 2, all good. Then ignore the rest. Now there's this one. And that one fails.
Now there's Terminator Genesis.
Which
I want to talk about in a little bit. But I just feel that there's something more about the nature of what humanity is in Blade Runner.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sort of that's more is it something that you can sort of grow in a lab, or put together in a sort of factory, or is it something that you're born with, which is central to the debate about certainly AI in sort of creative industries. Great art, the great films are made with humanity. And how can you generate that kind of humanity when you just put a few sort of buzzwords into some software and say, do this? You know what I mean? That's, again, at the centre of this debate. And I don't know, it just feels like resurrecting these films in that context, which I'm sure a lot of other much smarter people have already done. But, it really sort of, it gives these films an additional weight that they already had.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely Blade Runner. I need to rewatch it, actually.
And absolutely Terminator Genesis.
Oh yeah, let's put it on right now.
Shall we?
Let's just put it on.
Should we just do like a sort of like an audio? So we say, start the film now.
Commentary.
Yeah. Well, that's quite a good idea.
I think so. Yeah.
I think
it would be really interesting to hijack people with it. Yeah. So, like right now, if we just did a commentary on Terminator Genesis, and not advertised it as such, that'd be interesting.
That's a bad movie. We went to see it in the cinema together, didn't we?
Yeah.
Me, you, Alfie, Dan, two other beloved cinema boys. Maybe Lee. I think he might have been there. Guest of episodes of Yore.
But
I remember that was obviously I've seen plenty of dud films at the cinema. I think the last one would probably be Ant-Man, but
bitterly disappointing.
It was
that movie.
Horrendous.
Really weird.
And it's sort of on about, because obviously AI and robotics has always been the sort of central concern in the Terminator franchise. But what was interesting about that film is it also focused on like personal technology.
Yeah,
so AI could like manipulate the technology that we hold dear, like our smartphones, and it was a very sort of overt sort of criticism about our addiction to smart technology and our phones, and it's so fucking naff. But it's interesting to see that as well, that that element of the critique about how we integrate with this stuff and how much of our lives we've just shat into this digital space.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think a lot of us are starting to panic. I think a lot of our generation particularly is panicking about that.
Yeah.
And a lot of our generation who's subsequently now having children are thinking, oh, what do I do with my children? Like, I grew up without it, then had it, gave everything to it, panicked about it, and now like there's almost like this. It's almost like fashionable to be like, well, my kid won't have an iPad. My kid's going to be out with the badgers building forts. Which again is a nice thing.
It's a nice thing.
It's almost like we're going the other way, and it feels like Terminator Genesis in a sort of roundabout weird way. This is a fucking stretch. Is sort of almost channels that anxiety and that worry.
Yeah. No, you're right. There's something in that. I need to rewatch it?
No, probably not. I mean, I sort of just thought I wanted to mention it because I didn't like it.
But it holds an interesting idea that maybe had that been nurtured a bit differently, could have been kind of interesting. You're right as well. Like, it's usually people that don't have kids that say, my kid's not going to have an iPad.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. I always find that I assume that once you get children, you realise just how exhausting it is and how that time is so precious to you that a distraction for them it is kind of like maybe, I don't know, 3/4 of an hour of just getting back to your own life for a bit.
Yeah, man, no judgment from me.
No,
not at all.
I don't know. I can't think of any examples other than Terminator Genesis that harbour that idea, other than something like Men, Women and Children, which isn't really about robotics, but it is about people's addictions to social media and the destructive nature of basically sharing all, like, your entire life on to everyone else, and how again, it's a very on the nose film, not one I particularly enjoyed that much.
So about the alienating nature of it as well.
Yeah.
And how it actually makes you lonely. I mean, these are things that, again, is very common knowledge now. It's almost sort of like, it's like popular to hold that opinion now, isn't it? While simultaneously still using that technology.
Yeah, it's baffling how quickly it became a cliche as well.
Yeah.
You're doing the old criticising the internet thing. Ironically, we're streaming this on the internet.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So we've mentioned The Matrix and Blade Runner. I have Dread written down for some reason. I mean, It's not chiefly about robotics, though. I think I was thinking about Dread more in the context of this aesthetic.
Okay.
And how it's sort of weirdly similar to The Creator. It's a lot more grubby than The Creator.
Yes.
But in terms of like a singular vision for a future, I think Dread does a really good job in terms of being like a science fiction movie of just having like what appears to be a really singular vision of the future. I like Dread for that reason. District 9, which holds many similarities to The Creator. That's not about robotics, but I almost feel like if the aliens were swapped for robots, the central themes of the film wouldn't change at all, apart from maybe the sort of narrative parallels to what happened in South Africa, with
the
apartheid and stuff.
And
the idea of an alien species, it kind of fits more within that theme.
Yeah, I think so.
And I definitely don't want them to do
do
like a George Lucas on it.
Tough, mate, because I've started a campaign on X. Is that what it's called now? X.
He started hiring visual effects artists in Cambodia or something.
I guess what is interesting, particularly about District 9, is that it showcases that sci-fi films at their best can be these sort of tales that should inspire a little bit of caution with technology.
Yeah.
I think that, and I think this is something that sci-fi has done sci-fi horrors or sci-fi has done for a very long time. Think about like literary form with like Frankenstein. Science is going to take us to this point where we can challenge some of the great questions and problems that face humanity. But at what point is that going to create more problems and make humanity more fucking complicated? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's really fascinating to sort of chart that journey through sci-fi. And I think certainly in a literary sense, there were people writing books about these things so long ago, before they could even conceive the idea of robotics or AI or but a lot of these people were, or in sort of vague roundabout terms, a lot of writers or sort of philosophers were sort of talking about this. So the idea of technology, on the one hand, being hugely beneficial, but there's also having an air of caution towards each advancement, is something that's almost run parallel to the development of that technology. I think District 9 is quite an interesting example of a sort of more contemporary example of sci-fi's ability to sort of to almost attach itself to a moment in human history, and through sort of like fairly overt, but in my view quite successful allegory.
Yeah,
for,
completely.
I think the apartheid in South Africa. I don't know. It feels like a really good example of that.
It's a period of history that gets forgotten easily. Yeah, and it's a really great reminder to be kind of brought to the West, effectively, because like Neil Blomkamp's from South Africa. It's just kind of a reminder. Hey, by the way, this happened. It's not like another 9/11 film, Well, everybody knows that happened, right? But there's kind of countless other unspeakable tragedies that have happened across the world, and when a film that simultaneously juggles that idea and also is like a really decent, very singularly created in terms of like a creative vision anyway, and just like a good action film as well. It's just like some good action set pieces.
I've not seen it for a very long time, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times, and every time I sort of expect to not like it that much, but I don't know, like I always think, this is good.
It's really good.
This is really good, yeah.
It's the only Neil Blomkamp film that has a really successful kind of pathos in it. I don't know if you remember the kind of arc that is Vickers, he's called, isn't it? Vickers van der Merwe. And he starts out like a working for this corporation, right? And he's kind of like I guess he's like a bailiff trying to evict all of these prawns, they're called.
Displacing them or moving them somewhere else. Yeah.
And he has a really interesting, again, like it's been done before, but his arc's really like emotional, because he kind of gets outed like falsely as this sort of as someone who's sort of in league with the aliens all of a sudden. It's a lot more complicated than that, and his like wife leaves him and stuff. There's that bit at the end where it's, the technology in the film means he becomes one of these creatures. Creature's probably the wrong word to use, actually, but there's an interview with his wife, who's obviously naturally estranged from him because of this horrible kind of Cronenberg-esque transformation. And she's like, I found this outside. I don't think it's from him though, and it is. It's like a rose that he's made out of tin cans, and the last shot of the film is him creating this flower for her, and I'm like, fuck, after all that, like you brought it back home to just this like quite upsetting, very, sort of, you really empathise with him by the end. And I love District 9 for that reason, I think.
I think it's something that I think there are a lot of parallels between Blomkamp and Gareth Edwards in the way they approach sci-fi. I think aesthetically, I think we remarked even right at the start when we first saw the trailers, I think in the outro of the last episode, we remarked how aesthetically similar they are as filmmakers. And the creator has done nothing to dissuade me from that view.
No way.
They also like to approach sci-fi with this sort of like often lofty subject matter with like a ground level approach, certainly in terms of cinematography. There's a lot of handheld ground level shots, the camera sort of darting between moments of action and key characters, and it gives it that sort of earthiness, which I think works excellently in District 9 and works to sporadic success in The Creator, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later.
I remember I watched AI, Artificial Intelligence, recently.
Did you? Wow, that's one I've not seen for a very long time.
It's
Kubrick's final project,
swan song, but he never got to film it because I think he died before anyone gave him the money for it.
Oh, okay, yes, of course, that's right.
And Spielberg took over.
Yeah,
and it's really, as a film, it's kind of a Frankenstein's monster, alluded to what you said earlier slightly, because it's half this really interesting, very dark, meditative science fiction film about the nature of humanity and what it means to be human versus, like, you know, can we transplant our ideas and our emotions onto an external thing and have it act, you know, as faithfully as possible to a human being. Like, it has all those ideas, but then Spielberg injects this kind of family lightness to it that really doesn't work with the tone that I think
Spielberg.
Yeah.
Not that it's incongruent. I just mean that's a theme that he really loves.
But both of those ideas sort of work, but not in the same film. Like, it really is an example of two titans working badly together, not even together in time, because Spielberg picked it up. But I feel like he should have left his impulses at home when he made that film.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it for a very long time, but you there is a sense that the film is, you know, I think Spielberg is certainly a far more sentimental filmmaker than Kubrick.
Oh, big time, yeah.
And that's not a criticism of Kubrick, but the idea that he would pass it on, which I think makes sense given, you know, even then Spielberg's credentials as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. There is definitely something not quite working there between the two visions.
Kubrick just doesn't care about humans as much as Spielberg. And again, it's not a criticism, but like, all of his characters are so much more cold and morally in a very moral grey area a lot of the time. And that's not to say that they can't also be sort of, you can't also root for them and they can't experience sort of delight, but there's just something, I feel like Spielberg made it for the humans and Kubrick made it for the AI, for the robots.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it, actually. I'd like to rewatch, actually, because it's been a very, very long time since I've seen it.
Great moments in it. There's some really good scenes in it.
Jude Law's in it, isn't he?
He is, and he's really good in it.
Yeah.
There's a sort of aesthetic crossover in terms of the way, like, a lot of films about robots, especially humanoid robots, do this, in that they have a completely human face, and then it's almost like someone's taken a box cutter to their skin and kind of cleanly cut it away to reveal the metal underneath, and it kind of goes with the contours of the face. And there's an example of that in AI, artificial intelligence, and also an example of that in The Creator. Well, all of the what are they called? Simulants, which I feel like is a bit of a nod, not a bit of a nod, a massive kind of nod, almost headbutt to Blade Runner. A little bit, you know. Yeah. I don't know. There's only so many names you can take, I suppose. Yeah.
I was thinking broadly about the sci-fi genre. I know we've sort of like bounded around a couple of very familiar examples, and this one's no different. Trying to think of like a sci-fi film that sort of deals with ideas around technology and more robotics, AI, etc., in a sort of more positive light, and it's quite hard to find one.
Yeah, it is difficult.
Certainly in terms of mainstream examples, anyway.
Yeah.
And the only thing I think it's interesting to keep that in that context of mainstream, because I think there's the way in which many of these films have existed.
The
only film I could think of was WALL-E.
Okay.
WALL-E. It's WALL-E, isn't it? WALL-E.
He says it like WALL-E, but
yeah, he does.
I mean, it's an interesting title. I can't believe the title works as well as it did.
Yeah. But I mean, again, there's this sort of very over, as often is the case in sci-fi, criticism of technology in the way it not only does it sort of dehumanize its user to the point where, you know, they don't have really any sort of proper meaningful connections with one another. It's also destroyed the natural world in which they inhabit.
Yeah.
And in the process of sort of making people's lives as easy as possible, has obviously had a negative effect on the physiology of the human form. But it's also sort of, it's almost severed the connection that human beings have with their environment, their natural environment.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a critical element there. And obviously there's a critical element about human beings, because obviously it's the human beings that have fucking obliterated the planet, right?
Yeah.
This is often the case in sci-fi. You know, no criticism there. But it's ultimately the robots that help human beings realise how important that connection is to the natural world.
Okay, yeah.
And I think that is the only sort of like vaguely sort of optimistic robot sci-fi film that I can think of right now.
Yeah,
I'm sure when I go to bed I'll probably think of one, but yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
On Wall-E?
Yeah.
I do. I liked Wall-E. It surprised me because I watched a lot of. Well, I got bombarded with promotional material, and I just remember thinking, "Oh, his voice is annoying." I saw it, and I was like, immediately. There's something very, 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 very charming about it, as is the case with a lot of Pixar films. And then there's the environmental angle, which I thought would be kind of quite shoved down my throat, but it isn't. It's just like it serves as a backdrop for a very unique, quite emotional story.
Yeah.
The idea that this robot is it's almost funny how like its own creation has not just that robot, but humanity's creation, including this robot, has destroyed the entire world, and now it's left behind to fix it all as well.
Yeah,
it's really I need to revisit it, but I do. Yeah, I like Wall-E a lot. Voice isn't as annoying as you might think if you haven't seen it.
No.
Andrew Stanton's best film, I think better than Finding Nemo.
Yeah, probably. I don't really have a huge connection to Pixar. Really. Obviously Toy Story.
Yeah.
1 and 2. But yeah, I'd probably say so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm more interested in that than Fish.
Yeah. It's definitely the most interesting. It's one of their best, I think.
I think there's a sort of wider sort of consciousness to it than there is in the other films, and that's not necessarily. I'm not saying every Pixar film needs to have some sort of political or sort of environmental message, but doesn't hurt that particular film.
No. I'll talk about Minority Report briefly as well, which again isn't concerned with robotics per se, but the idea of something natural that occurs that human beings then harness. In this case, it's the precogs with pre-crime. So they harness it with technology, and there's a lot of technology in the film, a lot of futuristic technology, and I love the way that it almost the whole film becomes like a paradox, or almost like a kind of the kind of thing you might say to someone at a pub, in that, like, all right, so do you remember the ending to Minority Report?
It was all a dream. No, I can't remember.
Right. So basically, the founder of pre-crime has committed a murder successfully, and Tom Cruise finds out about this.
Classic Tom.
Yeah, and effectively, it's like it's framed as it's the launch of pre-crime becoming a resource that the entire world can use. And Tom Cruise is there, and he's like, basically, if you kill me, which is what you want to do, I know you want to do it, it will disprove the whole idea of pre-crime, the idea that every murder in the world can be prevented and is preventable. It's perfect. So if you kill me, it proves it's not perfect. But if you let me live, which is what you don't want to do, it proves that it is perfect.
Okay, so there's like a preventative measure.
Yeah. And there's just like I don't know, that the whole film just boils down to that point.
Yeah.
And it's great. I think there's a lot of really smart ideas in that. I mean, it's Philip K. Dick, which is a sci-fi kind of mainstay. Yeah. And I mean, obviously, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is like another, which is what Blade Runner's adapted from. Yeah. I think more broadly speaking, the Philip K. Dick's influence on my idea of a great sci-fi film is quite seismic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't think of another sci-fi writer, maybe Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah. I was about to say Frank Herbert. He just did Dune, didn't he? And that was it.
Yeah, I don't know about his other books, to be honest.
I'm literally not sure. I think he spent the
rest
rest
Bookie
of his
Boys
life.
to Bookie Men.
No, certainly not. Let's stray away from literature forever.
Yeah.
Dune's a weird one. Dune is one of those futuristic sci-fi films where it seems like humanity has transcended the idea of robotics and has they're kind of almost like higher dimensional beings in that film.
Yeah,
it's like they've kind of that's kind of happened. It's clearly happened, and then it's all behind them. And do you know what I mean? Like,
there's something weird about the technology in Dune, because on the one hand, obviously, it's like ridiculously advanced, but the practices like of warfare, for example, are still very sort of like
medieval. Almost.
Yeah, it's strange.
And the
Dune
idea
was
of the
interesting.
houses. Yeah, I think Dune is actually probably more influenced by the past than it is the future.
Yeah.
Or the idea of the future anyway. You can't be influenced by the future.
We went to see the film together yesterday, and the Dune Part 2 trailer came up, didn't it?
Yes. I mean, I've heard that the Part 2 of the book is the weaker part.
Oh, okay.
So they've adapted the best bit of the book already.
Interesting. I quite liked the first part.
Yeah.
I thought it was a bit obsessed with its own grandiosity.
Yeah.
But that seems to be the way with like modern blockbuster films that aren't like existing IPs. They will sort of strive for this sort of depth, which I kind of want and admire, but at the same time, sometimes it ends up like you being like, look how big, look how expensive and clever this is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're going to linger on opening shots for ages, you know? And I quite like that about it. Like, I think as a sort of an exercise in world building for like a film that was that big and clearly that expensive, it was really admirable.
Yeah, same.
But yeah, I'd be interested to see how it handles clearly what seems to be the far more action-packed section of the story. I haven't read the book, so I don't, again, no reading.
I can't pretend to have done that either.
It's not actually a book I've even considered reading, so maybe I will. I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those sci-fi books that I feel like you might have to turn a page and then go back a page.
Right.
Like, what the fuck happened in that previous page? I need to reread that entire page.
It's quite
because
a big book as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about 500 pages, I think.
Okay.
Maybe a bit more. I'm not sure. It's about the thickness of wall. Back to
a standard wall.
Yeah. Back to Villeneuve quickly. What were your thoughts on Blade Runner 2049? Do you think it suffered from that same grandiosity issue that Dune did, or did it win you over?
I mean, my opinion of the film is very much rooted in, I've only seen it the once.
Okay.
And obviously it doesn't compare to the original. But as far as like sequels go, we're really we talk about this a lot. We actually don't think we've mentioned nostalgia very much recently, but the sci-fi genre seems to be, alongside like horror, one of like the one of the genres to sort of cultivate or try and recapture those feelings of nostalgia. You see so many sequels, or reboots. We talk about Terminator Genesis, which was wank. The RoboCop remake, which was fucking wank.
Oh man, yeah.
So it's like, in the grand scheme of all of these sort of sci-fi franchises that have been bludgeoned remorselessly by this sort of tepid desire to make people sort of recapture a part of themselves that they're never going to be able to by watching a film. Which, I'm not saying that it can't be done properly, nostalgia, but in the case of those examples, it definitely hasn't. In that example, I would say that it's a good movie.
Yeah, it's great.
I liked it. I haven't seen it since I came out of the cinema in London with my friend Ollie.
Yeah,
who loves Blade Runner, and he liked it. However, like a rewatch, I'm not sure what I'll think about it.
Yeah, I saw it twice. It didn't hold up as much the second time. It lacked Vangelis, weirdly, because there's such a great atmosphere conjured by the first Blade Runner, owing, I think, in large part to the soundtrack. And that saxophone where you're like, what the fuck is a saxophone doing in a sci-fi film? Hold on a minute, no, this really works. The moments between Rachel and Deckard are so tender for that reason. And that was my main problem with it, weirdly, was that it failed. No, it had a bit more of a...
That's a valid criticism.
Yeah, the atmosphere is greyer than Blade Runner.
But that's, I think, the way a lot of modern blockbusters treat sci-fi now. It's almost like a deliberate stylistic choice, irrespective of like the thematic intentions of the movies. It just feels like, we've got to be dark because it's darker now. It's almost like it feels like this is sort of drifting away from sci-fi a little bit, but it feels like more broadly, because audiences are craving a more adult blockbuster experience, I think studios have realised they can still make narratives that appease the mainstream audiences, but they can sort of cheat them into thinking they're watching something more adult because the colour palette's darker and there's a bit of violence and the character says fuck once. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
So I don't know, I feel like that's a problem, but I quite like what I remember of Blade Runner 2049. I quite like.
Yeah.
I don't think a rewatch will make me sort of hate it, but I can't imagine I'll be lauding a huge amount of praise on it.
It takes its damn time as well.
Yeah. Again, that's sort of that thing, isn't it? That sort of slow burn.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it just feels more organic in the original films because they're so good. I don't know.
I think that kind of slow burn atmosphere has its place in sci-fi, but not in Blade Runner. I think it works really well for a film like Ex Machina, which is actually kind of maybe a good example of a film to talk about briefly.
Yeah.
It's just in the sense that the film toys very overtly with the idea of, can you create a consciousness?
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that it's left open-ended as to whether this robot has actually made a decision, an emotional decision, and has had an emotional reaction to someone, which is the whole idea. It's the sort of Turing test thing of Domhnall Gleeson going in and trying to forge an emotional connection with Ava, the robot in the film. There's a bit at the end of it which basically reveals that she is in fact sentient, in that and all it is, I love this, I love how simple that it illustrates this point, and a lot of people overlooked it. I'm not saying, by the way, the only reason I didn't was because I heard about it in a podcast. So I'm no cleverer than anyone else in this instance, but she just looks around and there's no one in the room and she smiles. I'm like, oh wow, what a great kind of way to illustrate, no, she's a living, breathing thing that has been created by us but is no longer governed by us. I think good kind of example of a film that deals with robotics made on the cheap, and very simply,
sort of single location, very isolated, 3 character sort of
shot in Norway in a month in a hotel.
Really? Oh, fucking hell.
Crazy.
I know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, on the subject of filming things cheaply, let's move on to Gareth Edwards.
Yes.
Sci-fi we could go on and on and on about.
I feel like we genuinely, that'll be a 3-hour one.
Yeah. Brevity, as we always say. But, Gareth Edwards is a filmmaker that, I was watching a recent interview with him and he was talking about, new filmmakers and particularly in terms of how, the technology that aspiring or new filmmakers have on offer to them is limited in comparison to your big hitters, right? Obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously, the fact that so much of this technology is readily available to people means anyone can make a movie. But I think a lot of people think that, you're fairly limited on the basis that you don't have the best cameras or the best editing software or, a fucking computer that has the power to run certain software or whatever.
Yeah.
But he is someone that very steadfastly believes that, you can still create a sense of sci-fi epicness even when you're limited by things like budget and technology.
Yes.
Which, and if we're going to start talking about Gareth Edwards in that context, what better way to start than his debut?
Yeah.
Because that is an exercise in a film that, the sort of sense of scale is omnipresent because it's background.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are moments where it's very explicitly in full view.
Yeah.
But a large portion of that film...
Monsters.
Sorry, I've not mentioned the film. Monsters, yeah.
Yeah.
It's always in the background. It's always there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting... considering his sort of point in that interview about, you don't have to be limited. And I think that speaks quite broadly to his career as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
As you said, bar a couple of examples, but in the case of Monsters, for sure, right?
I mean, Monsters was his calling card to make bigger movies.
Yeah.
And he did, and he largely was very successful in doing so. Actually, there's some things about the Godzilla remake I quite enjoyed.
Yeah.
Rogue One, I thought, had its fair share of script issues, and apparently it got taken over largely by Tony Gilroy. But nonetheless, there's some really good stuff in Rogue One.
I honestly, I I'm not that passionate about Star Wars, really. Obviously, I think I've said this a few times in this podcast whenever Star Wars comes up, but obviously I have a place for it, but I'm not like a super fan. But I quite liked Rogue One.
Yeah.
I thought that some of the casting was really good. I thought Donnie Yen in it was excellent. As that sort of Force-aware blind warrior.
That's right. Yeah,
I liked the sort of, again, overt, but the sort of nods to Vietnam. Which.
Creator.
Yeah, the creator
follows in those footsteps.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
incredibly overt. No, I think he's an interesting filmmaker, and I really liked Monsters. I've only seen it the once. Would have probably paid well to have seen it, but I'm busy, home renovation.
It's fascinating the way that they made that film.
Yeah.
And he employed techniques like this for The Creator as well, but for Monsters, it's so wonderful to hear the stories about the filming of Monsters. So they had, I think 12 people went out there to film it. They didn't have a dolly, so they used a van, and they covered the camera in pillows. And that was how they got their dolly shots. So any tracking shots, any shots that kind of pan across with parallax in the background, it's just in a van.
Oh wow!
Prosumer cameras, which again is something that he kind of revisited with The Creator.
Yeah.
I think his main strength is he sets a really high standard for himself. He did a lot of the visual effects for Monsters, but you can't tell. He used to churn out 2 shots a day until he got to the creature shots, and he had 2. Then it was 2 months per shot. But there's a really economical way that he does his visual effects. So he edits his films before touching it in that respect. So usually with Marvel, you hear about recuts and changes and edits, which kind of results in crunch time, I guess.
Yeah,
with people in the VFX industry, but Gareth Edwards is no, we got to in order to save money more than anything else. He's we'll cut it first, and then we'll know exactly where the shots go, and we don't waste any time rendering anything unnecessary.
Yeah.
But he just sets such a high standard for himself more than anything else, and his ability to deliver scale on scale, if you will, scale for scale, I guess. Just cheap, economical, to the point kind of filmmaking. It was fascinating.
Yeah.
And he did that again with The Creator. Apparently, he flew 4 or 5 people out to different countries to get loads of establishing shots. And that's it. That's all you need to do, and it looks fantastic. I think one of the strengths of The Creator.
Oh, visually stunning.
Really, really good. Really, really works from a design point of view. I really like the way it's shot, actually, as well.
I thought it would chime with you. You're a big fan of handhelds.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right. It is well shot, and I think that's what I quite liked about The Creator, actually. It reminded me a lot of Monsters. It reminded me of that sort of the humble beginning sort of thing. Yeah. In a way that felt quite genuine.
Yeah.
Because he's someone that is very much he flies that flag.
Yeah.
In his processes, as you say, he refuses to be limited. And even, in a situation he's in now where he obviously gets slightly bigger budget. So this definitely wasn't his biggest budget movie.
No.
He's returning to those practices and the uses of technology, which is sort of, I'm not going to say readily available for everyone, because that's not the case, but it's certainly more available than the cameras they use in other big blockbuster movies. You can buy that camera in Curry's. Yeah, which is,
you might have to take a loan out, but you can do it, and you can do I don't know why this has turned into an advert for Curry's PC World, but Still part of you, Ben. Oh yeah, I worked there for a bit. I forgot about that. Yeah.
What was that about your boss? Wasn't he a dickhead?
Alan, if you're listening, mate, that pint you got me that Christmas. Thank you so much.
Cheers, mate.
Yeah. No. But yeah, the camera thing's really interesting because you can't tell at all. It looks perfect. It looks really pin sharp. There's not even a single modicum of it being kind of amateurly produced or made. Whereas when you read about how he made it, you're you think, oh Jesus, I hope this looks good, because you've properly done this, like I said earlier, grassroots style, and it does instill a sense of hope in me that maybe other filmmakers in the coming years will take heed and maybe follow suit, and we'll get some interesting movies, including from Edwards himself.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing the sort of the gap between the industry, the sort of titans of the industry and the people who have just got a bit of gear and put stuff on YouTube. You can see some, you see the occasional projects that come out, and you think, God, that's not bad, given the constraints. So I think that gap is definitely sort of closing.
Yeah.
What that will do for the industry, I don't know, but I think the fact that he's utilising the kind of technology that is there from Curry's.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alan. I don't know. I think it's very genuine on his part. Obviously, I think he's someone. Obviously, he's very passionate about that element of the filmmaking process.
Yeah.
As an essential part of it, not just sort of like enveloping yourself in the best of the best, sort of in terms of the tech.
Yeah.
Realizing that you can achieve great things even with simpler, less refined things, which I like. I really admire.
No, me too. Yeah, I think it's really. I'm really, really interested to see what he does next.
Yeah,
and although, for reasons we'll get into in a second, I don't think The Creator is a perfect film at all. I think it's got a lot of flaws.
No, yeah, agreed.
But I really enjoyed watching it for that reason alone. I was like, this is clearly. I want to watch more films like this. In a cinema, because it is a cinema film as well. I do think that if you watched it at home, you'd lose something.
Yeah.
Which is odd considering the aforementioned Curry's camera. But yeah, it's just it was a delightful experience seeing it in that respect.
Yeah, and I think he's also someone, he's worked in the big, he's worked with Disney with Rogue One.
Yep.
He's worked with the big kahunas. He's for Godzilla as well.
Yep. Aaron Taylor Johnson, Bryan Cranston.
Aaron
Taylor Johnson in that film, I remember him having no neck. He'd been in the gym so much.
Oh yeah, he's going through his roid head stage.
Yeah.
Well, he's on roids. Can neither confirm nor deny use of roids. Of someone that's probably done 10 push-ups in their life. I can't commit. No, I think it's telling that he's returning back to that kind of tech, though, and returning back to that sort of philosophy after those experiences. I wonder how much they affected him as a filmmaker.
Maybe.
I mean, working on anything to do with Star Wars is notoriously difficult.
Yeah.
It's the intellectual property that the what's her name?
Kathleen Kennedy.
Kennedy. Yeah, she's very notoriously very protective of, often to the detriment of the end product.
Yep.
So, and I wonder what it was like for him, Godzilla, because Godzilla isn't necessarily a bad movie. It's just a very average blockbuster.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd be interested to see if he continues to sort of have this sort of ambition going forward. But this film, has it done well?
So yeah, its budget was 80 million,
which is in the grand scheme of modern blockbusters. I'm not sort of defending the use of the amount of money, but in the grand scheme, that is small.
It's small. It's really rare.
Yeah.
There's usually,
it looks good as well.
Yeah, man. You'll get your indies that made for about $1 million, $2 million. Then you'll probably get a couple of 15 to 30s in there, usually comedies or horror films.
Yeah.
But 50 to 80 million is really rare for a film to have that budget.
Well, the mid-budget film is, we've talked about this before. It's a rarity these days, isn't it?
It's nearly disappeared.
Yeah.
And I hope it comes back. However, it's done 63 so far, so it's made 63 million back, which isn't great, but it's been out since September the 29th, so it's been out for 13 days.
Okay.
It's not. I feel like this has potential legs at the box office.
Okay.
Unlike your opening weekend films, so you'll quite often see something like Star Wars having a ridiculously big opening weekend, like an event, and then there'll be a huge drop. It'll be 50% drop or something.
Yeah.
Whereas a film like The Creator, it's kind of it's a movie that, if nothing else is on, you'll go and see. So it might have a bit more legs.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know. Also, it was made by 3 different studios, so their financial stake in it isn't necessarily that great, divided between them. So I think it was E1, Entertainment One, and New Regency. And I want to say he's Fox as well, which is Disney. So they probably gave Edwards 25 million each. So in terms of it being a failure, it's quite difficult to define it as that, because nobody's got a particularly big stake in it. It might not have ever been created to make money. It might have been like a quite clever way of Edwards just making what he wanted to.
Yeah.
So difficult to say, which I know might not be the answer you're after.
No, I think it's interesting. I think, it's sort of stacking up against.
So you've got like Saw X, you got Blackberry The Exorcist, I think, reasonably big. Something like a Paw Patrol movie, and there's like a Taylor Swift tour film which has got a cinematic release. But I have no idea why. I mean, I don't really follow her, but she seems to be huge for some reason. So there's a fair bit of competition there.
I think as a sort of property that isn't a franchise, it's nice to see it exist.
Yeah,
and we said that, didn't we, on the way back? It was nice. Again, very well trodden ground thematically, and we'll go into that in a moment. But it's nice to see something that is at least pushing the envelope in terms of its cinematic style, and making something fairly competently.
Just nice to see a film set in Asia as well, weirdly.
Oh yeah,
do you know what I mean? Like there was like 2 or 3 scenes in Los Angeles, but most of it was, I think it was all filmed in Thailand.
Okay,
so it all looks really pretty, and I think Edwards is a big fan of crops. Do you know? There's a lot of. I remember there being a lot of crops in Rogue One. Yeah. For a Star Wars movie, there's a lot of crops in this. Like he clearly and it's the same with Monsters. I think Monsters where was that set in?
South America.
South America, yeah. So he's a bit of a globetrotter. Yeah, and I think he's quite keen on setting films not in the United States, which is again like a really refreshing thing to see.
Yeah, and his presentation of the United States as well. As often as this sort of, let's sort of go into the film now. His presentation of the United States as this sort of imperialist superpower that's sort of flexing its military muscles, often to the detriment of the objectives of the lead characters in his films, particularly in The Creator. For me, I think it sort of speaks volumes about maybe the lack of investment that you mentioned between the 3 production companies. The marketing hasn't been particularly strong for this one.
No,
it's not felt like some films just generate a sense of urgency about them, regardless if the film itself has any particular urgency in terms of its message. Whereas this seems to sort of, obviously I'm aware of it because obviously it's something we both love. So obviously we keep our ear to the ground.
We go to the cinema a lot, so it's difficult not to watch the trailer for it.
But yeah, it just feels like something that I mentioned to a few colleagues at work that I was going to see it, and none of them had an idea what it was. You know?
A lot of people at my work were the same. They were like, "Oh, what's that?"
Yeah.
Oh,
which for me, I mean, obviously, is it necessarily a microcosm for general public opinion? Well, maybe, given the current sort of box office statistics, but yeah, I don't know. I had no expectations going in on the basis that I knew literally nothing about it.
Yeah. Also, the logo looks like it's like the same graphical design as The Aviator.
Right, okay.
So you got a "the" and then a line and then a big letter. In this case it's a C. In The Aviator's case, obviously it's an A. But it's like a really, just Google it. They're like the same design. Right. It's really weird. I thought I don't know why this just jumped out as me as this is a bad logo for a science fiction film. It should not have been done in this fashion at all.
Right, yeah.
So maybe that just speaks to what you were saying about the marketing maybe being a bit shaky. Hannah as well, she took one look at the trailer, she's like, that looks shit. She genuinely said, she's like, that looks, it was that classic sort of leaning in the cinema thing and being like, not going to see that.
We do that quite a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
People sit next to us, not that many people do in cinemas, but it was, Ava Meads, it was a smaller screen, there's about probably 10 other people in there. You must have heard us sort of slag off a few of the other trailers and thought, what a pair of fucking tossers. I bet they've got a film podcast. I bet they have. Fucking losers.
Oh dear.
But I mean, what were your sort of thoughts going into the film?
Again, similar to you, I was excited, maybe a bit more so than you, because I I think the trailer had some moments which made me think, okay, this could be at least interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of the design, kind of got brought across in the trailer. It looked a little bit like, I quite like Halo. a lot of it reminds me of those video games. So that's.
I think Gareth Edwards is a gamer, isn't he? I think he does play games.
Wouldn't surprise me at all.
I'm sure it's him. It might be Neil Blomkamp. Again, I get those two guys mixed up. But
Gareth, if you're listening,
yeah,
email us at cineboyscinemen@gmail.com.
Please.
Your response here. But I was looking forward to it in a sense. I was apprehensive about maybe it being, like we said, like well-trodden ground. That was my main concern with it.
Yeah.
And those expectations were ultimately sort of met. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I the whole film, it doesn't do anything new. I mean, we said at the start of the episode that, you know, the nature of its existence around these sort of discussions that are very prevalent now, and our sort of discourse about the nature of the technology that is inevitably coming. Makes it feel a bit more present, and there's a sense of urgency to it. And I think that works in its favour to some degree, but I think it doesn't disguise the fact this film is very sort of derivative. Not just visually. We've mentioned the sort of stylistic parallels with Neil Blomkamp, but also thematically. And you know, that's a criticism. Your mileage may vary with that one, because, you know, ultimately the sci-fi genre is very derivative.
Oh, completely.
Most films in the sci-fi genre, it's hard for them to sort of break new ground, both visually and thematically.
Yeah, they always bump into each other.
Yeah,
one way or another. Like 2001, Interstellar, right?
Yeah,
and then like Halo and District 9. Which, Blomkamp was going to direct a Halo film, actually. So that's interesting that those aesthetic. Well, he was gonna. Funding fell through. Thanks, Peter Jackson. But yeah, it's interesting. The visuals for me really worked, but they're nothing new.
No,
at all. The visual effects are great for an $80 million movie. They are really good.
Yeah.
And there's.
What do you think of the fire effect?
They were clearly simulated with a piece of software called Houdini.
Right. Okay.
And they looked a little bit.
There's a fire scene. I thought I'm going to ask you about this.
Yeah. It's like the industry standard for explosions,
right?
And if they fall apart with close up because the fire kind of looks mushed together.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. That was actually one of the only times that I saw a bit of a sort of shaky VFX element.
I knew
I'd be very surprised if it wasn't Houdini that did those explosions.
Yeah. I think this film offers nothing new. You know, we've spoken, you know, in terms of films like The Matrix and the Terminator franchise, that, you know, this is a cautionary tale about the way humanity ushers in this new technological dawn.
Yes.
This is an example of where it goes wrong. I guess the sort of the difference here is the manner in which the aftermath unfolds, in the sense that AI obviously initially exists as something that supports and helps and protects Western civilization, and after a sort of apocalyptic event, classically the nuclear bomb, the atom bomb blowing up Los Angeles, the Western world disavows AI in its entirety, criminalizes it, treats it like a second-class citizen, despite the significant advancements in sort of giving these robots and androids, or the simians, or whatever they're called, a sort of a sentience.
Yes.
Where the film sort of is slightly different is in the way in which the West does away with it, but the East does not.
Liked that about the film.
Yeah. Asia is a sort of a haven.
New Asia.
New Asia. That's it. Yeah, it's like a haven for the robots that are sort of frantically escaping the purge that is perpetrated by the West, primarily led by America.
Yeah.
And this is where Edwards, I think, is using that as sort of like a foundation for his clear sort of thematic and visual homage to Vietnam, which he seems to be fucking obsessed with.
Oh man, yeah. Quite a accelerated pace as well.
Yeah, like, you know, the sort of the technologically advanced nature of the United States Army against this sort of ragtag mixture of robots and people. It's, you know, and the way in which America just conducts themselves willy-nilly over this sort of technologically inferior enemy.
Yeah.
You know, the parallels and obviously the thematic nods are obvious. And interesting. I mean, he seems to really like Vietnam. Not like the war, but it seems to be a very clear visual and thematic touchstone for him.
That was a kind of reasonably positive element about the film. I actually think the film sort of falls apart in its central plot with the whole idea of it's Joshua, isn't it? He's called something Joshua, like yeah. Well, initially he kind of gets lumbered with this child, this robot child who turns out to be like a representation of the next level of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And there's connections to his wife. It kind of works, but it doesn't really. It's not really clear enough what that is trying to say. Like, I don't really know what he was trying to say with that. He had the whole Vietnam stuff, and like obviously that was, you know, Vietnam was bad. Imperialism is like a mistake, and like those themes and ideas like communicated really well. But I don't know what he was trying to say with the child. And
I think we sort of talked about this on the drive back. You know, I think there's this sort of tendency for filmmakers that have these aspirations to take this sort of mid to sort of high budget films into the realms of, like, you know, like loftier movie experiences, is by sort of going very Malick.
Yes,
you know, they have a lot of these sort of like slow shots, you know, slow scenes, with tracking shots and interspersing these flittering moments of human connection amongst these lofty ideas. And a lot of the time, and I guess largely in this instance, it sort of just feels a bit naff, because it's sort of it basically just undercuts the sort of emotional impact of that relationship, which is such a driving force for the lead character. It just gives the film a bit of I don't know, just sort of it makes it smell a bit off.
Exactly. That a strange way to phrase it, but I get exactly
it was.
I get exactly what you mean, because they felt misplaced. Those edits felt misplaced in a film of this, which kind of has this quite lofty scale, and then for it to kind of cut to handheld on the beach, hugging and like lifting each other up, and then like a robot on a bike that bears there's no ramifications for that shot at all. It's just a bit too art student, you know.
I think so. And I guess it sort of ties well in one sense, because we're talking about this idea that Gareth Edwards is obviously channeling a lot of technology that these people would use.
Yes,
it's it's almost as if narratively he's doing the same. But I think the idea is maybe just to show how sort of constant this is in the lead character's mind. It just felt very indulgent. You know, and Nolan's guilty of this too, by the way. It's not just, you know, it's not just Gareth Edwards, you know, who's guilty of it. I just think it's, and I imagine it's like genuine. Like the intention is genuine. He's not thinking, this will please Mark Kermode. You know what I mean? He's not thinking that.
No.
But I don't know. Although I don't know what Mark Kermode's view is on Malick, actually.
Not sure. Yeah.
Please get in touch, Mark, if you're listening.
It's odd because it does. Again, it goes back to what you were saying earlier about it borrowing fairly heavily from other sources, as sci-fi does, of course. But it's just a bit too obvious. Is that kind of visual styling that's largely present in films like The Tree of Life? Feels misplaced. I feel like the film also struggles with the like internal logic a little bit as well, just in the sense that I don't know. For example, the big ship in it, you know, the big target ship thing. What's it called? Like the Nomad.
Something like that.
Its presence in the sky makes no sense. So there's a shot of it like in the Earth's atmosphere, and then the next shot it's like beneath the clouds. There's an internal logic problem there. Also, a lot of the robots get taken out by one bullet. Like they wouldn't have been constructed in that way. And then, but that only happens when it's convenient to the plot as well. There's a logic plot hole issue. I feel like that could have been refined ever so slightly.
Yes. I think the idea is to sort of victimize the technology for, the thematic parallels. I mean, I feel the film, alongside the sort of discussion around AI, is a very overt comment on that sort of Western imperialism.
Yeah.
And I guess in the service of those narrative themes, it's befitting that the robots are sort of these sort of
almost helpless
in the face of this sort of like ceaseless, ever-present quest to purge them via the use of this ridiculous technology that the Americans tend to exude over
but then
lesser civilizations. Not in the way I perceive them, but in the way technologically speaking.
But then it's strange because Ken Watanabe gets shot in the chest and the big hole gets blown in him and he gets up.
Yeah.
Like, well, what are you going for? Are these robots meant to be weak, or are they meant to be indestructible? Because you're having your cake and eating it.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Also, he could have died and it would have had no bearing on the rest of the plot anyway, so I don't quite understand. Again, there's just a nitpicky issue I have, which with concerning internal logic, which is perhaps more important to me than it should be. Yeah.
I think you're right in both ways. I think, for a film that strives a lot to have that internal logic as the central part of what we're supposed to connect to as an audience, I think that's absolutely valid to point out the flaws.
Yeah.
It's so essential in films like this.
Yeah.
The internal logic is central, right? Because it's not based in our logic necessarily.
Yeah.
Or what we perceive to be the world that we live in. So when you create that world, and you want to commit to elements of that world for us to sort of feel the things that you clearly want us to feel, then you fucking better commit to it wholesale.
Yeah, I think so.
But that may be sort of like a broader blockbuster issue as well, to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, just a few things to iron out, maybe. But I can't claim to have made The Creator, so, I think largely it is a positive thing that it's happened and that it's come out.
Yeah.
It's good child acting as well, just as a brief aside. The child in it, I'm not sure of the actor's name, unfortunately, but really commendable and can't have been easy, especially if there's only 4 crew members. So fair play.
I also thought narratively it was very airy. I didn't feel like, I thought it moved far too quickly to really sort of justify any of the emotional beats that the film really wanted you to connect to.
Yeah, agreed.
The film moves so fucking quick, and it even had that thing of like all the the title cards for each part.
Yeah,
and I was like, it feels like there's a real ambition here, but it's not being realised in the sort of pacing of the plot at all.
No.
And again, like I didn't dislike the film, but I did come out just feeling a bit sort of empty and a bit sort of cold to it, on the basis that there is like a lot of, as we say, like a lot of things that are very derivative about it outside of the confines of the sci-fi genre.
Yeah.
But also it's just a bit narratively flat. It feels like there's a lot of ideas here that are sort of scarcely excavated beyond the surface level, and I think it suffers for that.
No, it is. You're right. It's very scattershot and doesn't ever really come together in terms of having a cohesive beginning, middle, and end with an emotional center point. Like Josh was played by John David Washington. The relationship he has to his wife I didn't really connect with that on an emotional level at all. There's quite a sweet moment at the end that concerns that, but again, it was a bit throwaway and didn't serve much for me.
No, I also think the reason for spoilers, the reason for why him and his wife are separated is because he's like he's deep undercover, isn't he, for the Americans, trying to find the creator of all of the robotic life forms in New Asia. He has to ingratiate himself into the sort of into the New Asian way of life, and he obviously meets his true love, and they get married, and they're expecting a child. Then the film starts with her realising that he's an agent, and that causes them to sort of obviously fragment, and her to become seriously injured. And that, again, spoilers, that dictates a lot of the movie. But the reason, like, his sort of reasoning for like trying to justify it to his wife hastily in the start of the film is that he hates robots and that robots don't feel anything. So he feels no guilt about the process of killing these simians or whatever they're called and their robot brethren. But the moral reawakening that he has as a result of meeting the young child robot is so fucking quick.
Yeah, it happens like really quickly, doesn't it?
And I just think, well, if this is sort of like, if that's like the central idea of the film, that, you know, we need to sort of be more compassionate and we need to sort of embrace this technology with the compassion that will ultimately benefit humankind.
Yeah.
It's fucking quick, mind.
yeah.
Very rushed. And by the end, he's sort of like hugging the robot. And it's obviously, again, spoilers revealed that the robot is a sort of a part of the DNA of his child,
actual human child.
Yeah, you see a fucking coming a mile off. I think I remember you saying that.
Yeah, I will give it to the film for not overdoing the twists, though.
Yeah,
I liked that about how it kind of just reveals them under the table. It doesn't. There's no sort of musical swell.
No,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
but at the same time, the fact that it's predictable is clearly an issue.
Yeah.
Even he's revealed to be undercover, and it's just like a throwaway line, a bit of a naff bit of dialogue, where his mate just goes, "By the way, you're undercover," and his wife hears it, and that's that. It's like, what?
Yeah.
There should have been more of a kind of graph to that.
Yeah. And I think that speaks wider to the film in general. I think there could have been a lot more build-up.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, we sort of simultaneously mock the film for taking its time in certain areas, but the times it does slow down is just for those sort of shots of them on the beach and stuff.
Yeah.
I want you to spend more time actually developing the character and developing his arc. And having moments where he starts to sort of piece together the sort of worth of this sort of constructed humanity, not just the humanity that he's been inherited through birth.
Yeah.
There's none of that. You know? It's just him going from, I just turn him off like a TV to like hugging one.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know. Bit rushed.
Definitely.
His performance?
Better than Tenet.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I don't want to be harsh on the guy because I think he is a good actor, but I'm just not convinced of him as a blockbuster lead yet.
No, me neither. I feel like obviously his performance in BlacKkKlansman was pretty damn good and a really good. It wasn't his debut, was it?
No,
but it was commendable, and he's had some lead roles since. Where I agree with you. Not entirely. I don't think he can really carry a film on his shoulders just yet. I feel like maybe trying out some supporting roles might benefit him.
I don't know what it is. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's more the films that he's being a lead in. Because you do find that, don't you? I mean, you know, actors that are very capable and probably are brilliant. They're just let down by what they've got in front of them.
Yeah, true.
In terms of the script.
Yeah.
So maybe it's more of a case of that, and the sort of big, sort of swashbuckling blockbuster films that he's sort of been the face of haven't always sort of worked out.
No.
But not convinced.
No, I don't think so. I mean, if he's in another film coming up soon, it's not like I won't see it. Like, I think that's fine. Yeah,
absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with his performance at all. Indeed, largely the performances in this film are, at the very least, serviceable and often reasonably
solid.
Good.
Yeah. There's no weak link.
No, not from an acting point of view. Definitely not.
Yeah. Well, outro.
Yeah.
Questing the cinematic void.
There we have it.
Aye.
Then, yes. Cheers, mate. Interesting to talk about that. It's, you know, I feel like maybe we came across a little bit harsh on it at the end, but I think I want to reiterate that it's, regardless of its shortcomings, it's nice to see a mid-budget film that's not already a pre-existing property.
Super ambitious
out
film
there
as well.
Yeah.
And it largely pulls off that ambition in terms of, from a visual standpoint. I think it really pulls it off.
Yeah.
Fair play, Gareth Edwards.
Edmeister. Next week,
Expendables.
Expendables 4.
Yes.
This is literally an off-the-cuff decision. Trailer looks shit.
Yep. Reviews look shit.
Yep. Not to be too harsh on old Sly Stallone and crew, but
no.
Not looking good. As for someone that loves action movies as much as I do, I will never get over how disappointed I am every time watching an Expendables film, given the potential these films have. And never fucking live up to.
No, I haven't seen 2 or 3.
Well,
So-
first off, what you're doing.
Yeah. No,
I think there's a bit in one of them. I think it might be. Is it 2 with Jean-Claude Van Damme, who plays
Maybe.
John Villain? I can't remember if it's 2 or
Okay.
3, but like there's quite a good bit in like an airport with Arnie and Chuck Norris turns up, and that sort of like is one of the few times the franchise flirts with this idea of what it could have been.
Right, yeah.
Before sort of retreating to some sort of like sweaty, alarmingly hyper masculine nightmare.
Yeah, with CG blood that got criticised for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
ridiculous.
PG-13 territory. I know the first 2 weren't, but I think distinctly remember the third one
Yeah,
getting
the
criticised.
third one is not good. So high hopes for the fourth one.
Yep.
I mean, the only thing that I might like is there's a bloke from the raids in it, Eco Away. I don't know
Okay.
who Away is. I'm so sorry, but I like him.
Yeah.
I've sort of I've watched his career just out of interest since the raid. But I mean, I would just wonder if, like in all Western action films, I think we talked about this in the John Wick episode, they just criminally underuse the actually talented action stars.
Yeah.
In place of sort of like just feeding the ego of sort of old white action stars as they waddle around the film set.
Yeah.
To be fair to Sylvester Stallone, he still looks fucking pretty good for his age in terms of physically.
Yeah, I don't know.
His body.
He clearly knows the cinematic terrain that he is walking on.
Yeah,
He's very aware. He's very self-aware in that respect. I just think that self-awareness gets lost in some of the films that he makes, perhaps not through any fault of his own.
No, I think he's better when he's not in charge.
Oh right, okay, yeah.
'Cause I think he directed this one.
Did he? Okay, doesn't surprise me.
I think so. I might be wrong.
Okay. Well, find out next week.
Yeah, cliffhanger. So that you got that to look forward to.
Yep.
So have we.
Yeah,
Great.
no. I might try and revisit some, as you said, off mic just now, some bargain bin action films.
Yeah, I
as
think
well.
it'd be a good place to talk about that because the Expendables franchise is like a very expensive version of a bargain bin action film.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is something we have talked about before in relation to, we talked about action films in the context of like East versus West or East and West with John Wick. We spoke about it quite a lot in terms of canon.
Yeah,
so we're
yeah.
aware there's going to be a lot of crossover, but I think in talking about those kinds of films, we can sort of break new ground.
Yeah,
As far as Cineboys are concerned, anyway.
maybe we can like list off some films we think should belong in the bargain bin but don't.
Yeah,
and vice versa or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I like that. Cool.
Yeah.
In the
Nice.
meantime, enjoy this episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you then.
Cheers. Love you.
Love you. Bye.